a lot of ecofeminists out there draw this parallel between the destruction of the earth and devaluation of women's bodies. And I think so many of the sort of patriarchal capitalist systems that are, attacking women in so many ways and devaluing women are doing the very same thing for our earth. And so I think when we talk about reclaiming women and reclaiming women's bodies, I think we can't necessarily talk about that without, in the same breath, talking about reclaiming our earth connection.
Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody, Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim, the podcast. I am back with another guest. Today we have Jessie. Jessie is going to be talking about birth, whether that is birthing a baby, birthing a project, a relationship with our bodies, a relationship with earth. It's a beautiful conversation, and I'm really excited to get into it. But first, of course, some more things. Thank you to all of you who support the podcast on Patreon. I know that, every dollar, dollars matter, and I don't take it for granted that you decided to place a few dollars in Patreon to support the sustainability of the podcast. Let me tell you, having someone edit my podcast has been such a godsend. It feels like I'm becoming more and more official, so it's pretty cool. So thank you. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. Here's something that I have been navigating. This past month has been really, really wild because I've started clinical training. If you're not familiar with what it looks like to get your master's in clinical psychology, part of the requirements is to spend a few hours a week at a low-cost clinic and do therapy. And you're basically doing it for free. You're not getting money from it. The clinic gets all the money that the client gives you. And the clinic that I'm working at is a low-cost clinic. It's sliding scale. It's based on income. So it's very affordable for people who want therapy. And I get to then do therapy. And in exchange, I get to be trained on how to be a therapist at the clinic as well as at my school. So clinical training is pretty important and pretty cool. So I started at the not beginning of March, I think the end of February. So I've been at this for about 3 weeks now, and I'm spending about 20 hours at the clinic. And I have to keep reminding myself that this is what I want to do because I'm feeling, I'm not going to lie, a little overwhelmed. On top of 20 hours of clinical training, I have my beautiful clients and the women of Worthy Women Rise that I'm devoted to giving all of my time and energy to. I love my work. I love my business. I love that I get to do what I get to do. Sometimes I look at my calendar and I see a calendar filled with coaching clients, and I just remember so viscerally, 4 or 5 years ago, wanting this so terribly much. I wanted nothing more than to look at my calendar and have a full client load. And now I get to have that. And so how do you step in gratitude that I'm doing everything that I want? I'm learning so much about how to become a better healer, how to hold space for people in an even deeper way, how to support people's trauma in an even deeper way. I'm getting the most amazing experience and expertise in a field of psychology that really excites me called psychodynamic psychotherapy at an amazing clinic that's only 10 minutes away from my house. I'm being in community and meeting new people who are so in alignment with who I am. So all of these amazing things are happening. I continue to get to do my podcast because of your support on Patreon. I mean, when I first started this podcast, I didn't know if it was going to be sustainable. I didn't know how long I was going to be able to keep at it. And while I'm still navigating, I'm starting to feel some changes. I think I'm going to start to do some more solo episodes with the questions that I've been receiving from you all. It still very much excites me to be able to have conversations with some of the most amazing women on the planet who are doing brilliant, brilliant work. So I have all of these amazing things going for me, right? I have this partnership that's just so supportive and, well, you get the point. There's a lot to be grateful for. My life feels so much in alignment. And also alongside all of these incredible things, I've been navigating debilitating bouts of depression, anxiety, and inability to sleep, which feels really perplexing. It feels unsettling and oftentimes overwhelming and alienating. Some days getting out of bed feels like a miracle. And, what I've come to realize is that when it comes to experiencing true joy, this is the work to find ways to lean into the good while also honoring the backdrop of personal and collective challenges. There's so much going on in our world right now that I'm attuned to. How do I stay connected to that while also staying connected to my gratitude and joy? How do I make sure that I'm not ignoring the challenges in pursuit of the good, but also to not let the challenges consume us either? Because what I'm finding is that challenges give our joy richness, and the good stuff gives our life hope. The magic is in remembering to hold both lightly. In this way, we start to truly come home to ourselves, hand in hand with all of who we are. The joy is the key to our liberation, so may we find it wisely. May we find a way to tap into the joy while also honoring the hurt and the pain, and that can feel impossible sometimes. So if you're in that impossibility, I'm there with you. I know it. I feel it in my bones. It's not an easy place to be. The pain can feel so just consuming. And the lie of the pain is that this is all there is, right? The lie of the pain is that there is no joy. And so making sure that we're honoring the pain, that we're giving space to the pain, that we're processing the pain, but also really holding on to the rope of the joy, that in any moment, joy is here too, even if we can't see it in the moment. Okay, so let me bring Jessie on. So Jessie Harrold is a women's mentor, wilderness quest guide, doula, and author of the book Project Body Love, My Quest to Love My Body and the Surprising Truth I Found Instead. Jessie likes to say that she does women's work, which means she helps women bring their babies earth side, creating community and holding brave spaces for women to find themselves in, helps women reconnect with their bodies and the earth, and offer up a dose of word medicine wherever she can. The thread that weaves all of this together is Jessie's unwavering commitment to helping women and mothers unearth and reclaim their connection to themselves, their power, and their sovereignty. Jessie offers Unearth and Mother Shift mentorship programs for women, pregnancy retreats, rewild wilderness quests, and one-on-one doula support. She lives, writes, and tends to her family and her land by the ocean in Nova Scotia, Canada. So as you're listening to this conversation, I want you to be thinking about your own relationship to your body and the earth. What have you found the connections between the two? How often do you lean on the earth to support you? And what does it look like for you to develop a deeper relationship with your body and a deeper relationship with the earth? Hello, Jessie. Welcome to Reclaim. I'm so thrilled to have you here with me today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I feel like I say that with everybody. I feel like I always say I'm so thrilled, but like I am. I get genuinely so excited about the people that I have on the podcast and to get to know a little bit about your world and your work. I think it's just such a treat. So thank you for your time, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the things that we talked about before we started recording is your relationship with the body, women, birthing, the earth. Like there's just a lot there. And I would love to start the conversation with like, what brought you into this work? Like what inspired you to go into writing a book and leading programs and being in this quest of exploring sacred pregnancy? And I'm reading from your website here, and wilderness quests and birth doula. Like, how did you get into all of this?
It's such a funny, like a diverse array of things to do. And I like to say that I do women's work. I work with women. That seems to be the common denominator. But my work started, I guess, really about 10 years ago when I started my work as a birth doula. And I've been doing that sort of the longest. And really, I feel like I learned everything I know about the work I do now in that work as a doula and supporting women, not just to birth their babies, but to birth themselves as mothers. And so yeah, so inherent in that work is supporting people through, monumental life shifts, identity shifts, and what I kind of view as a modern day rite of passage, and supporting women to observe that rite of passage, because of course we've lost touch in our sort of dominant culture with so many rites of passage that used to be really well supported with ritual and community and that kind of thing. So that was kind of where the work began for me. But I've always had this really diverse array of interests and loves and passions. And so when I set out to actually start a business and try to make something of this work, I became very curious about the experiences of transition or, identity shift, really, rites of passage that women experience in other aspects of their lives. And so started getting really curious, not just about women's lived experience, but also looking at some of the literature and research and information that's out there generally about how women make change in their lives and how we go through these sort of massive shifts to our identity. And that's where I started kind of pulling in some of these other elements. And running through it all has been this real reverence for women, reverence for our connection to the earth, and that sort of sense of the archetypical feminine. So, not the gendered feminine necessarily, but that sort of earth-based, really ancient wisdom that we kind of have lost along the way in so many ways. And so got really curious about that as well. And that's kind of led me to a lot of the work I do with women who, well, they may be mothers, but who are also just navigating this path of life and not necessarily birthing their babies at the same time. And so there's this kind of twofold path that my work takes with both women and mothers.
I love that. And I think as you were talking, it just clicked for me just how important the role of a birth doula is in a woman's journey of becoming a mother. I just had this visual of imagining giving a baby, like having a baby in a hospital, and the very mechanics of that process without maybe, depending on their partner, somebody there who is experienced in the process, but more oriented towards making sure not only that the baby is fine, that the mother is fine, that the mother's emotional well-being is being taken into consideration. And I actually was just scrolling on Facebook this morning, and I saw a picture of a brand new baby with the mother posting like that she had. It was very short. She was like, after a long day, this baby came into the world. I don't want to give a name, but the baby came into the world. And I was just like, wow, can you imagine undervaluing what that long day meant to you? Because that's what I've heard, right? Like, instead of saying like, after a long ass fucking day of pushing this thing out of my vagina, and being in pain for however many hours, this beautiful thing came into the world. No, it's like, after a long day, welcome my baby. And like, don't talk about me and my process, but that is so important.
Yeah, we tend to have this kind of mechanistic, medicalized view of birth, that it's like, a day in your life. And for a great many women, they see it as something to kind of get to the other side of, like something that's scary that just needs to be gotten through. And I really see that really long day as being a microcosm for the macrocosm of what it takes to be a mother. It's fundamentally, it's stepping into the unknown. It's learning how to advocate for yourself and your baby. It's, a whole bunch of what I would kind of think of as like meta skills that you need to be able to mother confidently. And that's not to say that, certain birth experiences create more confident mothers, not that at all. But that underlying the entire experience is sort of what it takes to prepare us for motherhood. And yet we don't really see birth that way as a culture. I think maybe the tides are turning a little bit, and we're seeing what this means to women. And again, like, we kind of think that mechanistic view of birth, we sort of see postpartum as that way as well, like as a series of tasks that you need to learn how to do, like changing diapers or breastfeeding or whatever. But what's really also happening is the transition into motherhood. And that transition takes 2 to 3 years. And that's not to be scary. That's actually just to be really comforting. Like, it's okay to F this up for 2 to 3 years and not really embody the role. And that, to me, that 2 to 3 years is the rite of passage. Birth is merely the initiation. And there's so much more that we need to go through in those 2 to 3 years, including grieving the woman we once were before having that baby. And that's where I think we kind of leave mothers. We sort of say, oh, great, healthy mom, healthy babe. That's what we wanted. And kind of send our mamas along their merry way. And I think what we are starting to understand is that that's not supportive necessarily of this massive rite of passage that we go through.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe physical health, but what about emotional health and spiritual health? How do we measure that? And how do we make sure that we're being supported in those very important ways?
Yeah, and I think the kind of physical health and emotional health get very quickly conflated because, we can go through physical processes in our birth experiences that can cause trauma, either physical or psychological trauma. And so I think that's where the two kind of mesh. We may have like a physically healthy mama and babe, but a mama who is having a really hard time processing what happened in her birth experience. And so I think,
Yeah, it's just, as you're talking, I'm just at awe at how we never ever really hear about the traumas of childbirth and the physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, as you said, that that a mother may have endured. And I feel like it seems to me as an outsider, I'm not in mommy circles, so I'm speaking with very little experience here, but it just seems like in mainstream culture, there's not a lot of space for that and those conversations.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to have some more conversations about birth trauma. And also, I think we need to kind of open up those conversations a little bit more broadly. Like open up our definition of what trauma might look like, and really kind of hold space for those mamas who are just feeling some complex feelings around their birth experiences. We tell our birth stories until we're 99. It's really important what happened in that room. And it's not just important what happened in that moment, but how we're kind of processing it and how we're supported to make sense of it as we move forward in our lives too.
Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts. I know in the entrepreneurial space, there's a lot of the use of a lot of birthing metaphors to talk about birthing your business baby, or, birthing and the pains of labor of putting a new project out into the world. And I've heard that can feel very offensive to some people. And I'm curious your thoughts around it, and how we can be respectful of this like really important phase for some women's lives.
That's really interesting. I have certainly heard those metaphors, and I've not thought of it as being potentially offensive. I certainly use, in sort of the other part of my work with women, I really use that kind of term to talk about women birthing themselves and coming to a place of sort of self-awareness, self-knowledge, and sovereignty. And so, I see that process, I see anything where we're kind of stepping into the unknown and making ourselves vulnerable in some way or another. I see so many parallels between those processes and birth, right? Like it's still, we still have to be courageous. We still don't know what the outcome will be. And we still can have complex feelings of, say grief of leaving behind that which is no longer, and stepping into this kind of liminal space of, I'm not that anymore, but I'm not quite this yet. And, who am I? And really, I feel like, whether you're birthing a business or a book or a baby, those are really parallel experiences.
Well, and I also imagine too, on the other side, it's like the process of birth has been so ostracized, and like it's a woman's issue, and like it's not really talked about again in mainstream culture, that using that language can seem as a reclamation of the space that we're allowed to take up, and the ways in which we're really deeply affected by the birthing process, and whether that birthing process is a baby or something else. And using that language can maybe expand our understanding of what it looks like for a woman who chooses to be a mother.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you talk about a reclamation, I think of, again, those sort of, skills of the archetypal feminine, that sort of comfort or, management, I guess, of stepping into the unknown, the use of intuition, the deep connection with your body that's required. All of these things are sort of what we think of as this kind of feminine energy. And those are what's needed for birth. But I think that's also what's needed in our world right now. And so you're right, like those kind of skills and abilities and values and ways of being have been ostracized. And now I think we're seeing, actually, they are precisely what the world needs: a little less linearity, a little less, kind of outcomes based experiences, a little less medicalization. Yeah. And so I think it's a beautiful parallel.
Yeah, I love that. And, part of this conversation must include our relationship with our body and our relationship with earth. These three things, birthing, body, and earth, I think are so interconnected. And I would love to hear how you've seen that connection, that play with the women that you work with.
Yeah. I mean, I think our connection with our body is sort of kind of, maybe what gets unveiled first. And I think certainly in birth, we're almost jolted into connection with our body. We almost can't deny it because it's happening, whether we know how to kind of integrate that or not, right? Yeah, but I feel like we have this, we have this experience in our culture right now where so many of us are living kind of from the neck up, taking in and producing a lot of sort of information and, through our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and not a lot of embodiment. And I think that, we can also speak specifically about women's bodies and the way that women have been sort of disconnected and segregated from their bodies through shame, through the medicalization of perfectly normal female processes like menstruation, birth, and menopause. We've been kind of, from all fronts, divorced from our bodies in so many ways. And so there's something really, really powerful about women starting to reclaim that connection with their bodies. And this earth connection comes in there too. We, again, archetypically, we think of the earth as being a feminine entity. We think of women as being connected to the earth. We talk about Mother Nature. We know how women's bodies are influenced by the lunar cycle, for example. And, a lot of ecofeminists out there draw this parallel between the destruction of the earth and devaluation of women's bodies. And I think so many of the sort of patriarchal capitalist systems that are, attacking women in so many ways and devaluing women are doing the very same thing for our earth. And so I think when we talk about reclaiming women and reclaiming women's bodies, I think we can't necessarily talk about that without, in the same breath, talking about reclaiming our earth connection.
Yes. And what does that look like, to reclaiming our earth connection?
Yeah, I think it can look so many different ways for so many different people. But I always, when I'm working with women, I just start by getting them outside and noticing, their bodies in relation to the earth. And so, I usually offer up kind of a few really simple kind of earth connection practices, trying to get outside every day and like notice something about the world around you. Notice the changing of the seasons, or notice the moon. Maybe go so far as to notice like how, if you're a menstruating woman, how your menstrual cycle is perhaps connected to the moon at that moment. And just kind of taking note. And I think, so much of us, we know all of the wonderful evidence to be found around the benefits of just being outside. I think we have this beautiful reciprocal relationship with Mother Earth, where so many of us can find ourselves in the outdoors. And at the same time, when we begin to notice the land that's around us, we then feel that much more invested in its protection.
I love that. I think that that's certainly what I've seen for myself, is that every time I carve space to be connected with nature, I find a little piece of myself. I live in LA, so I go to the ocean quite frequently. That is very healing for me. And every time I'm there facing that ocean and I'm feeling the sway, I start to feel it in my body. I start to feel the connection with my heart and the waves, and I dig my toes into the sand and the sun against my face. And there's this moment where it feels like this is what's real. Nothing else is really real. And it's a moment, right? Because obviously that moment passes and then we're back grounded in the context of our lives. But in that precious moment, it's just this deep sense of this is pure. This is what's needs more of our attention. If we felt this way more often, we wouldn't rape and pillage the earth the way that we have.
Yeah. I think there's this process of kind of remembering ourselves back to the earth, because there's so many things that kind of keep us separate. When I lead women on my wilderness quests, for some of those women, it's the first time they've seen a sky full of stars without light pollution. And they're in such deep relationship with the earth because it's a challenging experience in the outdoors, and the earth calls us to our truth so beautifully in those moments. I think it's such an important reconnection and reclamation to make.
And I feel too that, part of being able to hold space for the earth, part of that relationship must include developing a new relationship with our body. And I know that the conversation of body and body reclamation is very close to your heart. You have a book on it, which, by the way, the book looks beautiful. I mean, just looking at the cover, it just looks, oh my God, like I'm nourished just by looking at the cover. And I'm like, yes. So I would love to hear a little bit of your story of your own body reclamation and what that has meant to you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm so glad you like the way it looks. It was a labor of love, to be sure. Yeah. So for me, it's interesting. So I don't know where to start this story. I've always been a larger bodied person ever since I was a really small kid. I was a large kid. And so being in a larger body and just sort of being kind of, not quite belonging, I guess, in the world because of my body was an experience that I've had my whole life. And thankfully, it probably wasn't until my 20s that I actually figured out how to do anything about that. So I was kind of spared myself a childhood full of dieting, which is a good thing. So through my 20s, I began to kind of cycle through some pretty intense periods of dieting and overexercise. And a lot of my overexercise was based in this idea that my body could do cool things, and a lot of this sort of like conquering challenges mentality. And so it wasn't just that I was like hitting the treadmill a lot, it was that I was doing crazy shit. Like I broke a record for swimming from one Canadian province to another, a 13-kilometer swim across the Atlantic Ocean. And I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And so I was kind of using the earth almost as this space for me to conquest and to show everyone how powerful my body could be. And then, in my, I guess, 30, when I had my first babe 7 years ago, and that pulled me into a really kind of different relationship with my body where, I was able to grow and birth and nourish a human. It was sort of a new space for me to feel, still accomplished in my body. But after having my children, I was unable to kind of exercise and diet in the same way that I was through my 20s, and really started to kind of spiral down into a rock bottom in my relationship with my body. Put on a lot of weight, which was, partially the result of carrying and birthing 2 children, partially because I was unable to kind of keep up with the hamster wheel of dieting and overexercise that I had been on through my 20s, and probably partially, some of the metabolic damage I did to myself with all that dieting, and hit a new low while simultaneously starting my business and becoming kind of more out in the public eye. And I felt really ashamed. I felt very much like, how can I be a life coach? How can I be, run these retreats and, tell women or share with women how to kind of quote unquote live their best lives, which was sort of the focus of my business at that time, when I'm a fat person. Like I must look like I don't have my shit together because I'm fat. And that really kind of just sent me deeper into this spiral. And so I started to kind of use some of the, theory that I had learned about around like rites of passage and life change and complexity, like looking at complex problems and trying to sort of, I say problems, but issues, and trying to solve them or come to a resolution with them in a way that wasn't kind of slapping a Band-Aid on it like dieting. And it was through that process that I started writing this book. It was about 4 years ago. And it started with just me kind of doing these, what I call tiny experiments in kind of understanding my body and trying to shift from hating it to what I thought at the time was going to be loving it. And, admittedly, that first year of tiny experiments was kind of surface level stuff. I mean, partially very understandable because I'd just kind of birthed 2 humans and was coming out of the postpartum fog and, just needed to like shower every so often. So that's really, where it started. And in the second year, I kind of realized, this shift into feeling at home and in relationship with my body is going to come from the inside out. Which, you know, maybe I could have articulated intellectually before starting, but had to kind of go through the process. And, you know, it was during that time that I took my yoga teacher training and kind of came to a new level of understanding of what my body was capable of, whether or not it was fat, and and also exploring some of the actual, you know, literature and community out there around, you know, things like health at every size, and understanding what all of that dieting had done to my body, and ultimately came to this place of this really different place than I thought I would end up at. I really thought that I was seeking body love, and that at the end of this experimentation and the end of writing this book, I would be able to look in the mirror and just do a happy dance because I love myself so much. And what I realized in the end was that some days that feels like a big ask, because I'm a fat person living in a world that isn't particularly kind to fat people. I will still experience what it is to be in oppression because of the size of my body. And I certainly have a you know, an intersection of other privileges that make life easier for me. But fat is one of the things that I am that makes life difficult. And so kind of realized at the end of it all that, like, if I don't always love my body, that's okay too. And with a lot of self-compassion, I was able to finish the book and kind of, you know, conclude this chapter, I guess, of my body love experience, knowing that this would be a practice for the rest of my life, and that self-compassion was the most important tool or most important offering that I could give to myself as I journeyed forward.
I love that. And I want to just read this excerpt that you have from your book on your website, because as I was reading it, it just felt a lot of things. So it says, every single woman's magazine, every person who asked when I was due, when I wasn't pregnant, the clothing store that didn't carry my size, and all of the places and ways in which I never felt a sense of belonging, the clothing swaps, the yoga classes, every time my lived experience as a fat person went unrecognized and unacknowledged, I forgive you. The boyfriend who wished my stomach was smaller, all the men who didn't even consider me worthy of their attention because of the size and shape of my body, society and myself for the beliefs that male approval and the male gaze is the currency of valuing women's bodies, I forgive you too. Everyone who has underestimated me, shamed me, been ashamed of me, I forgive you. I tried everything to direct your attention to my mind, to my accomplishments, to what I could achieve physically, despite being fat. And I am no longer willing to do those things, which leaves me here, just fat. And a whole bunch of other things too, but also just as I am. Just what you see, without the distraction of my proving and doing and denying and proving yet again. I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. And I think that that's so powerful, and for so many reasons, but one of which is that for so many of us, we want to get to that place of forgiveness. We want to get to that place where we can say, you know what, I forgive this culture, I forgive all these people. But for many of us, we're not there yet. And we're trying to do that kind of spiritual bypassing of getting to the forgiveness before letting ourselves get into the anger and get into the outrage and get into the frustration. And I would love to hear how you went through that process and got your way through to a space of forgiveness, and maybe what you've learned along the way in that state towards forgiveness.
I want to kind of, you know, lean again on this idea of rites of passage, which has been sort of such an undercurrent of my work. And so I really viewed this process of coming to terms with or being in relationship with my body as a rite of passage. And so when I'm kind of working with women through this process, we start with like this kind of orientation to what is there, what is showing up for me. And the book really starts out with, what exists here? What is the history of my relationship with my body? How do I feel right now? I wrote a section called 41 Things I Know About My Body, just things I know about my body, sort of getting this lay of the land. And then when we start making shifts, we have to realize, as I have mentioned before, that there's actually an identity shift that was happening for me at the same time. So this wasn't just, this wasn't about me losing weight, certainly. Although maybe in the very, very beginning, I was kind of crossing my fingers and hoping that might happen because I was assuming that was the only way I would learn to accept my body. But shifting identity from being someone who was kind of a fat denier, someone who had to hustle really hard and work really hard and effort so that people would think I was okay despite being fat, so that I could prove myself. That took a huge amount of my time and energy and life. And so when you think of it as an identity shift into a woman who is okay with being fat, or like most days, who's no longer willing, as you had mentioned in that excerpt, no longer willing to try that hard to work for people's acceptance of my body, other people's acceptance of my body. And so in that, whenever we're making sort of a major identity shift like that, we do this process of grieving who we once were, and letting go of that person. So for me, it was letting go of dieting. Oh my goodness, that's a huge shift to make in your life. And so much of our kind of participation in diet culture is also wrapped up in our sense of belonging, which is so primal for us. You know, I can belong so long as I participate in this culture. My body is okay so long as I've got a plan to change it. And so that was monumental. And then so part of that process of like grieving and unfolding came this sense of forgiveness, but not before there's this kind of, again, this liminal space of I'm not that anymore. What am I now? And starting to explore like what's possible now. What's possible if I don't diet anymore? What's possible if I don't have to go for an hour-long run every day? Or, and I guess that's kind of what unfolded for me, was this sense of like really needing to, I guess, when we're talking about grieving, also this process of releasing and letting go of some of those really formative experiences I had had that shaped my body shame. And, writing is a huge catharsis for me, and that certainly helped to let it go. But I don't want to be kind of Pollyanna-ish and assuming that like I've totally just wiped my hands of all of those feelings. Like, of course, it still hurts when people ask me if I'm pregnant and I'm not, or, I still totally remember the words of people who've shamed me based on the size of my body before. But I feel like I've done some of the work towards releasing that, or just kind of finding a sense of inner belonging or inner confidence that helps me to be a little bit more resilient to that.
I love that. I love that you said that, because I think so many of us think that forgiveness is this destination. And once we're there, we're going to feel like we're like walked into heaven, ta-da! And like all the angels are singing, and then everything good will happen in your life and nothing bad will ever happen again. And as a reminder, forgiveness is not a destination. It's a continual arrival and a continual exploration of the places where we can't forgive. And instead of demanding that we forgive, doing the process work, as you so beautifully outlined, Jessie, of like going through the grief, going through the anger, going through the process that's required so we can get to eventually the forgiveness. But, I never think the forgiveness is the ultimate goal. I feel like forgiveness is just an inevitable outcome of doing the work. But wherever we're demanding ourselves to forgive, there's an attempt to minimize our own pain,
Yeah, I feel like there's sort of this sweet balance perhaps between, the healing of these kind of, fraught relationships we've had with our bodies or with any aspect of our identities really. And, the importance of our rage and the
Mhm.
importance of our rebellion against the systems that would have us oppressed, And so
Mhm.
there's some kind of, I don't even know, someday, I don't think I ever really walk that balance skillfully. But,
Mhm.
some days where I feel more acceptance and healing and just kind of okayness. And then some days where it makes me angry.
Mhm.
And I
And we're
think,
allowed to be there.
yeah, exactly. I think there's a place
Mhm.
for it.
I love that. Any final thoughts before we wrap up the conversation?
Oh my, I've just really enjoyed this. I've just loved where our conversation has gone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I think your story, your journey, and everything that you do is so important and so beautiful. And it's very much in alignment with my work and how I view the world. And I'm just so excited to continue to see more and more beings talking about this stuff and seeing the importance of this stuff. So I love that you're helping spread this message out to the world.
I so agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessie.